Okay, I'm looking at two articles, and already I find that it's unfair to punish people because they're worried about their health, they're afraid. And now you're punishing teenagers for speaking out on what they experienced when they go back to school, when the schools are reopening. And I feel that is unfair because these students, their lives are important. And if you want them to succeed in school, you want them to also succeed by feeling that they can safely go back to school without the fear that they could get infected with this disease. So I was a little scared inside America's reopening of schools. And so here you have it, teenagers that are expressing their fears and some of the things that they have actually experienced by schools reopening. And so this is out of the New York Times by Adam Wren and Dan Levin. And so here's a young lady. Her name is Liz Wright. This is by Liz Wright, who shows Kennedy Heem. So I may not be pronouncing her last name correctly, but I think her name is Kennedy. Um, and she's at her home in Elwood, Indiana on Thursday, July 30th, 2020, her first day of high school. She tested positive for coronavirus on the following Wednesday on August the 5th. And so this young lady, Kennedy Heem, is going to explain her experience. So Indianapolis, and it was a purple Powerade that convinced her. So Kennedy Heem's first day of high school was last Thursday, and by the weekend, her school in central Indiana had already closed its doors after a staff member had tested positive for the coronavirus, and the other employees were required to quarantine. So Kennedy's mother got a call from contact tracer saying that her daughter, who's 14 years of age, she's a freshman, and says that she might have been exposed. So on Monday, they went for testing at a National Guard armory just down the street from her school. So Wednesday morning, they got the results, and Kennedy had tested positive. So I just felt like I had a cold, she said. So a few hours later, quarantined in her bedroom, meals were being delivered to her while she was masked. Kennedy sipped on some Powerade, and she said she had classic COVID-19 symptoms. That's what she realized. And so I was trying to hydrate, she said, and I was like, definitely can't taste that. So she lost her sense of taste. And so as the first students returned to the American classrooms, many faced profoundly altered experience where sitting next to a friend or a long bus ride or unmasking at a busy table in a cafeteria carries a heightened level of risk. And so these are the things that the students are experiencing, and they're explaining and expressing their fears as well, what they've been going through. And so most schools have yet to open. A growing number, especially in the nation's largest district, are opting to stay online as caseload hospitalizations deaths continue to climb at their states. But in some places, including Indiana, Mississippi, Tennessee, and Georgia, students began streaming back into classrooms early last week, with quarantine quickly following thereafter. So Elwood Junior, Senior High School in Indiana, where Kennedy attends, reverted to remote learning after the positive tests came back for most of the people. The staff, which now include at least 2 students, were reported, although it plans to reopen just hours into the first day of the new year at Greenfield Central Junior High School outside Indianapolis. Administrators received word that a student had tested positive. So North Paulding High School in Dallas, Georgia, a series of wildly shared photos showed students crowded into a packed hallway during the first days back to class this week. So this is what I was saying once again. It's basically backing up all of what I feared was going to happen. How can you social distance all of those students? that are crowding into a school. And so if you're going to admit a few students, you're going to admit all of the students. So there's no way you're going to be able to have students stand 6 feet apart with that many students going back to school. So that's right there something you can't do. They can, however, they can be masked, but some students are going to want to wear the mask. Others are not going to want to wear the mask. Some will wear it correctly. Some won't wear it correctly. Some parents may be okay with their kids wearing masks. Others may not. So there's going to be a lot of mixed emotions and messages, and some of it might be political to some people, and so or maybe they feel like they don't need to wear a mask, and so this is going to be a problem. So in North Paulding High School in Dallas, Georgia, the series of widely shared photos show that students all packed in the hallway. Few were wearing masks, and there were little signs of social distancing, generating criticisms of outrage in the news reports and on social media alike. And so 15-year-old student of North Paulding, Hannah Waters, was suspended. Now, they suspended a student simply because Waters said in a text message the school principal could not immediately be reached for this comment, but the district superintendent defended its reopening plan, saying that photos had been taken out of context. So elsewhere, though, where there had been less controversy or reason for concern, a familiar school day feels like, well, familiar. Some students, pioneers, told us what it was like being the first American school children back into the classrooms this fall during coronavirus pandemic. And so they suspended, from what I read at the top of the article, they suspended a student for basically showing you photos of kids being packed into the hallway at the schools. And so it's even says it, I believe, one of the articles I was looking at said that a kid was suspended because they had, kids have cell phones, teenagers have cell phones, and so this student, I guess, had snapped some photos of what was going on in the school, and it got out in social media, and people were not happy about it. So Jalea Walker, 16, Corinth High School in Mississippi. Jalea Walker had an option to attend her junior high or junior year online, but she had not seen her friends in months, and she knew the challenging course load would be easier to manage with a teacher in the classroom. So I wanted a sense of normalcy. She said so. On July 27, Jalea went back to the school in North Mississippi and to one earliest students in America to do so. So she and her classmates had their temperatures checked before entering the building, and everyone was required to wear masks. Desks were more spaced out than they were before, and there were rules for walking in the hallways. Students ate in the classrooms instead of in the cafeteria, which is a good idea, but still there's challenges. So despite the changes, Delia said things felt pretty normal, and it was a huge relief to see her friends again. So we had been texting and FaceTiming and just ready to see each other, but by the end of the first week, a student had tested positive for the virus, and everyone who had been in contact with that student was sent home and quarantined. So it started to be different as soon as the COVID positives started coming out, because the classroom got way slimmer, Leah said. And so by Thursday, the school had 6 positive cases of COVID-19, the district said. So her mom's advice, Juliet, is now taking her classes virtually because they don't want to take any risks. So she does not know when or if she will be able to return to school. See, these are real lives of students, and they're speaking out. And, some of them are being punished for telling the truth, for showing pictures of what's going on. And even though this school, they actually tried to do social distancing, they tried to have the kids eat in the classroom, they tried to use protocols, but still, if somebody is positive at the school, we've heard all in the news, 1 or 2 positive people, 10, 20, it triples, doubles, quadruples. And so this is risk taking. So Austin Lines 18 years of age, New Palestine High School in Indiana, as the editor-in-chief in the high school yearbook and photographer for the school newspaper. Returning to school is a big story in Austin Lies, but reporting the pandemic has already been challenging, he said. So the newspaper yearbook staff cannot walk around the school as freely as before or march up to strangers and ask the questions. Because of the pandemic, you have to stay a certain distance. So he does not know if photographers and reporters will be allowed at the sports events either. So it presents a question, he said. So lots of questions. So on the first day, on Monday, there were already breaking news. About 20 students had quarantined 14 days because they came into close contact with a student who had tested positive before school had even started. So the student's physician gave the family an incorrect date for the student and whether they could return to school. Local media reported this, so some of Austin's friends have had quarantine as a result, he said. So it makes me nervous how quickly everyone is going to be quarantined and put out of school, he said. So Ian Wellahan, 17 years of age, Alcoa High School in Blount County, Tennessee. At his school just south of Knoxville, Ian Wellahan said that students seem evenly split on the dangers of COVID-19. About half try to behave like it's normal and others are paranoid, he said, adding, I'm one of the paranoid ones. So at Alcoa High on campus, classes are limited to 1 day a week. Okay, so this is the way they're approaching it. So my day on the campus on Tuesday, I had said I had been to 2 classes, but it is nothing like what it was before the pandemic. So the desks are configured so that there are plenty of distance between them, he said, and we have to wear masks except when we're seated in the classrooms, and then it's optional. And we're encouraged to hurry between classes so that there's not really any time to talk about COVID or anything else. So he said some of the students pay attention to the social distancing requirements, especially at lunch, but there are solo seating, which is what I do, he said. So Ian said that he just wanted to stay focused on getting safely through the senior year so he can start college hopefully when everything is back to normal. So that was his experience. So Peter Gunter, 15 years of age, Sequoia High School in Canton, Georgia. Peter Gunter's sophomore year began on Monday. Masks, which are recommended and worn by most students, that was the big topic. It were a big topic of conversation, of course. So it was very stressful on the first day and the second day. And there will be no bullying to any students who decide to wear masks. So they had to make that clear. And so that is what adults need to follow behind. So, or to not wear masks, of course. And so if people don't want to wear masks, don't wear masks. If they want to wear masks, but don't bully either or. And stay a distance from people if you don't feel safe being around them. That's what my opinion is. But he said that bullying that is done there could result in high penalties, is what they said to the students. So other changes abound. So the water fountains are blocked off. They can't use water fountains. You have to bring your water. Classroom seats are assigned to aid in possible contact tracing. And so during lunch period, classes are staggered. And so this is what they were going to try to do, but how can you do that with so many students? Into the smaller groups with everyone other than the seat kept empty, one seat kept empty, and no one eating across the table. And so it's kind of hard, but I can't have as many friends at the table at the same time, but it's okay, Peter said. So his orchestra class that he takes, Peter says that cello and the chairs are spaced 6 feet apart. Okay, so, and there is no band or chorus. Wind instruments singing could spread infection. So when the pandemic hit, Peter's mother, former science teacher, made masks for healthcare workers, mom and dad. They have been stressing about how careful I need to be with this, Peter said. So he washes his hands between every other class and before and after eating. So we're taking this very seriously. So Kennedy Hume, 14 years of age. This is the picture that was first shown at the beginning of this whole article. So she's from Elwood Senior High School in Indiana. And on her second day of quarantine, Thursday, Kennedy said that she was feeling fatigued and that her case did not seem as bad as the others that she's heard about. So I was a little scared after getting the results on Wednesday, she said, and at least 3 or 4 other students she knows have tested positive at the school, she said, but she is not sure how she might have been infected. She doesn't even know. So, or if she could have been infected anyone else. So it came out of nowhere, she says, and I don't know who else I was around, she said. She went to a volleyball practice the week before starting school, but no one came within 6 feet of her, she asked. And so she also diligently wore a mask during her 2 days at school, but she said except while at lunch when eating, so whenever she tucked her mask beneath her nose, she would make sure that others weren't nearby, of course. So Kennedy's mother, Liz Wright, also started school last week. So she is a second grade teacher. So her school remains open while the high school is closed for the week and the students um, are distant learning. Uh, so now she and her daughter have quarantined from each other. So she can't be within close proximity of her daughter because her daughter tested positive. And so I'm not going to lie, I have been skeptical about kids getting it. Wright said, so some people think that kids can't get it. Well, this is proof that they can, this article. And many other articles. But to be a part of this pandemic, it is a real thing. So it's not fun to have to FaceTime your daughter in the other room. This article originally appeared in the New York Times. Okay, and so this is real. And some people apparently, because they haven't known anybody or they haven't thought they caught it themselves, or they assume they don't have it, or they haven't been around anybody that's positive, they think it's not real. And so this was the last story I was reading about this young lady right here who tested positive and she went back to school. And so these are the students talking. This is their experience. And, when you have people that are insisting on children going back to school, let's hear from the students. Let's hear what their experiences are and how they feel. And there are a lot of kids that are scared. You're forcing them to go back to an environment that they could get sick. Some may not have as serious an illness as others, and others may be more seriously ill from this. And then staff are not the students. They're older. They might have previous conditions that could put them in the hospital or in ICU. So this is pretty serious. And so for them to reopen some of these schools, this is telling you what's happening. And it's almost like they're testing this out on the students and the staff that are willing to do this. It's like they're using them like a lab experiment to say, let's, you open the school, let's see what happens, and then we'll go from there. And so, like the young lady's mother said, she doesn't like having to FaceTime her daughter, because she has to quarantine away from her daughter has to quarantine away from her mother. And so their situation is scary, but think about it. Her daughter had to quarantine away. Now, think of households who have like larger families and they can't just distance themselves from a family member. That means all the family could get it. How do you quarantine all the people away from one another? It's impossible for some people to do that. They're in situations where they cannot do that. And so I don't think that they really thought this out. And so here's the other article that I was looking at. I thought it was really alarming. Black Lives Matter, BLM protesters facing a life imprisonment for smashing windows Let me read that again. Black Lives Matter protesters facing life imprisonment for smashing windows in Utah demonstration. They broke windows. You can replace windows. It's not like they shot people or killed people. They broke windows, and you're going to give them life imprisonment for breaking windows. I could see a fine. I could see maybe doing some community service, cleanup, but life imprisonment, that's going too far with it. That's my opinion. So a group of Black Lives Matter BLM protesters in Salt Lake City who allegedly splashed paint and smashed windows at a district attorney office could be facing life in prison. Why life in prison? Clean up for defacing property, a fine, a hefty fine you have to pay if you can't pay it. Now you got to do community service for a long length of time. Maybe you might have to be in a detention or something like that. But to do life in prison for a merely broken windows, that's just ridiculous. So the charges brought against the protesters have been given a so-called gang enhancement. Okay, here we go with the gang thing. So a legal device introduced in the 1990s allowing authorities to add years of extra jail time to underlying sentences where people have committed a crime together. So civil liberties watchdog and the city mayor have called the potential sentences excessive. It is. It is. It's excessive. It just doesn't make any sense. However, the district attorney himself said that the protesters are unlikely to face the jail time, which is a good idea because they don't need jail time for broken windows. That's just ridiculous. Maybe a fine, maybe to clean up, maybe community service, but a life imprisonment for broken windows is ridiculous. So the protest occurred July after District Attorney Sam Gill ruled that two police officers had been justified in shooting dead 22-year-old Bernard Palacios Carbajal, okay, so whom they had chased down the alleyway after responding to a report of an armed man in Salt Lake City's motel. So Mr. Palacios Carbajal, who was found to have been carrying a loaded handgun, was shot 13 to 15 times. Oh my God. You shoot him that many times because he's carrying a pistol? Not that he shot somebody or killed somebody or pointed the gun at somebody, but because he's carrying. And all those police, I know there's probably a lot of them, you can't apprehend. You got more guns than he does. How can you not apprehend somebody like that? And you just take to shooting them 13 and 15 times. So dying of his injuries probably instantly. When Mr. Gill announced at his finding that the killing was lawful, hundreds of people arrived at the protest outside the office building. You bet. Yeah, because this doesn't make any sense. These people, so this is what ignited them to break the windows. I get it. Okay? Not that I would go out and break some windows, but I could see where the community anger comes in. So some people handle things a lot more different than others. But the thing is that when people feel hopeless and they feel like justice is not being served to the ones that it should be served to, and that they're being treated unjustly, then you might have a heightened level of protest that become pretty violent because people feel like you've wronged them. And by shooting somebody 13 and 15 times, and it's one person against probably a bunch of officers, I'm sure it was. Well, as soon as they hear the word gun, there's going to be at least 3 to 4 cop cars out there. And so it says some of them began painting the street and the building red, while others broke windows and scuffles that broke out with police officers. So according to Salt Lake City Police, 4 people were arrested. 39-year-old Ryan Moore, 32-year-old Mercedes McKinley, 21-year-old Emmanuel Hill, and 18-year-old Sophia Alcala. In a Twitter thread earlier this week, Ms. McNeil wrote, "Proud to confirm that I have been charged with a felony shifting my weight in front of a cop." Okay. What we have all failed to consider is that allegedly bracing yourself to be hit by the riot shield is actually much more violent than hitting someone with a riot shield. Okay. So perhaps the DA is right. So anyone who braces himself for a physical attack may deserve life in prison. So incredible that Sam Gill not only excused but commended the behavior of the officers who shot the 22-year-old in the back. Okay, so I think I've seen this story, and it is sad that this happened. He was shot in the back 13 and 15 times, but it is willing to throw a group of teenagers and 20-somethings in prison for life for allegedly check notes, painting a building. That is crazy. Isn't that crazy? You know, they think it's okay to throw these young people in prison for speaking out on how they feel about this young man being gunned down in the back 13, 15 times. So the charges leveled and the potential sentence they carry have already attracted plenty of criticism, including from the local authorities. So in a statement, Salt Lake City Mayor Aaron Mendenhall said that the prospect of such harsh, yeah, it is harsh, sentences was clearly alarming. So if a crime is committed, there should be a consequence, she said. But consequences need to be proportionate to the crime itself. Exactly. I agree with that. So, and in this case, where we're seeing the potential for the individual to spend a lifetime in prison for buying paint, that is too extreme. Exactly. I agree. It's too extreme. So I don't agree with the extent of the potentials of these charges, and I hope that the criminal justice system won't take it that far. Exactly. But I don't know, because of the fact that it has a Black Lives Matter on it, and because of who we have that are so vehemently against it, um, maybe they will take it further because it's personal. So, however, Mr. Gill told the Associated Press that I don't think anyone is going to be going to prison on this. I don't think they should go to prison because this is not a prison type of incident. So pointing out that it is common for cases to end with pleas or lesser counts that carry non-custodial penalties. Okay, so yes, I agree. I mean, come on now. Life in prison simply because you speak out. Look, can't you see they're all masked? They may not be spread out and separated because you got these riot cops that are basically, they're the ones, you don't really see the protesters doing anything except trying to brace themselves for getting hurt. It's more the riot people, the cops, that are doing more of the aggression here that you see in the photo. So it's just, it's just too much. And so you have this article here about the BLM protesters facing life imprisonment, which I think is really ridiculous. And then you have students who are basically young teenagers who are telling you their experiences going back to school. These are the schools that are in person, and some of them have had to revert to going remote because they know it doesn't work. They tried it. And so you still have these lawmakers forcing people, basically forcing you to get sick, forcing you to take the risk of getting sick. And if you get sick, what's going to happen? You can't go there anyway. When you're sick, you're going to have to go back home where you were. In the beginning, you were trying to stay safe. So crazy. But anyway, I'm going to let this video go. What do you think about this? It's so ridiculous. The numbers have not gone down. And then I'm hearing, so I'm going to add a little bit more into this, is that some jobs are not even hiring now. Because, you know why? Ding, ding, ding. Some of the people at these jobs, at these essential jobs even, have started contracting COVID-19. That is the reason why some of the jobs are not taking any more employees, because they don't want more people to come in and get sick and then have to send them away. They don't have that right to do that. They can't just do stuff. They know, hey, we have to close down. We have to shut down. We cannot, just like you want the parties to shut down. Here in Los Angeles, Eric Gil Garcetti, he said that if you have these parties and these house parties and these large gatherings that he's going to shut off the electricity and the water and the utilities. He just made a, a mandatory order on that, and I believe it was yesterday. And so we've seen that on the news. And so it's the same thing. Here you got people, you don't want them to be at a large crowded parties, but you want to force them back into schools, which that's going to be crowded. You want to make them go back to work in places that probably are going to have other workers. That's going to be crowded. There's some things that you cannot social distance, even if you try. And so some of these schools have told you they've done trial and error and it doesn't always work. And then how are you going to have only a few students learning and then you have a whole bunch of other students not learning? So more than likely you're going to have most of them at home remotely learning. And because it just doesn't work. And so until they don't have this disease, and like I was looking at another article, they were saying there were 2 ways they can do it. Do a strict lockdown so that nobody can get out and make other people sick. So that doesn't seem to work, especially in the society that we live in, because so many people are so they're very, very much protesting against, they have their rights. We don't want to wear masks. We don't want to be locked down and all this. So we're going to still have the disease. The other way is making that vaccine that will keep people safe, or the other thing is doing like the other way is testing. And now what I'm seeing is the test. Some people test negative, then they test next week and they test positive. So sometimes that does not wait for it. So that's the reason why I've been hearing that this disease is probably going to be with us for quite a while because of people's selfishness. And it's in all directions. It's not just people who don't want to wear masks. It's some of that. But then it's also the mixed messages that we've gotten. How people haven't been very forthright. They downplayed the virus in the beginning when it started out. They knew that this was coming and they could have prepared. They could have mobilized people and prepared people early on, and maybe we wouldn't have this many deaths. So if we look at COVID-19 right now, what is it bringing? It's bringing protest, civil unrest. People are uneasy. People don't feel safe. And so, when you look at COVID-19, this is just LA County alone right here, what we're looking at. And there's a website where it says top news at a glance. So LA County exceeds 200,000 positive cases as a COVID-19 crisis response, 48 new deaths. 3,290 new cases confirmed of COVID-19 in Los Angeles County. And so that's what it has brought in the county, Los Angeles region. So I've driven past this place right here. It's always closed. The only thing that's open is the restaurants. You can just buy food and take it out and go. And so a lot of the restaurants that were indoor restaurants have gone to doing outdoor seating. Some of them have gotten some donations, some money or whatever. They've sort of done. They do an outdoor seating because it's been said that if you have a well ventilated area, people sparsed out, separated, wearing masks. Some aren't wearing masks, but as long as they're in a ventilated area, it's more safer than having them indoors, where it's not as ventilated. There's not as much, air, to push the germs away. And so these are all of the things that they talk about having to do with COVID-19. And so, it has brought crazy protests of frustration because of how people have been treated based on their backgrounds, and then these crazy laws. And so this article, what was by Andrew Naughty, out of the Independent, on the BLM protesters possibly facing life. And then the other article was about COVID-19 and how the kids feel going back to school. So we see that doesn't always work for everybody. And this article was out of New York Times by Adam Wren and Dan Levin out of the New York Times. And so it says inside America's reopening of schools. So it doesn't always work. And like I added in there, some of the jobs are starting to slow down because why? They're not saying, but some of those workers are testing positive and they have to send them home. They don't even have hazard pay. I've been hearing some of them complaining that they were essential workers. They don't have hazard pay and they're just being quarantined, sent home. They test positive and that's it. No more job. You were working, now you're not working. Now you have to try to see if you can draw unemployment and they probably haven't put enough into it to even draw any. you know so what are you doing in the case that you go back to work and you weren't positive before you went to work, but now you go back to work because you're listening to Mitch McConnell and all of these other people say that people won't go back to work because the unemployment, they're getting $600 every 2 weeks, and that's too much money. And then you go back to work and then you get sick and now you can't get nothing. So what do you do with that? Now you got kids going to school, they're getting sick, they have to go back home and stay home. Tell me that something isn't wrong with all this. But anyway, I'm gonna let this video go. Like, comment, subscribe, and thank you for listening. This is really disturbing. I just think people need to get the priorities straight as to how this thing should go. And not to mention, we have a looming crisis upon crisis. We have evictions. You keep halting the evictions. When you lift the evictions, those people that didn't pay still like that. What are you going to do with that? Then I heard that Donald Trump was saying that he was going to ban evictions. How do you do that when you have all these apartments and millions of people that are in that situation, right? You have landlords. What do? How do they pay the mortgages on the property? And then what do all of the renters do if they have, how does that feel? Let me show you something here in verbalizing. What about people who have tried to pay their rent and they paid their rent and they've done the best that they could and they're running out of money and they're not really that behind, but they could end up being behind. They could get sick. They could decide to go back to work, get sick, and have to come back home. And so you put a ban on evictions, so that may help people like that. But what about people who just never, even before the pandemic, they were troublesome tenants. They never paid their rent. They were giving a problem to the landlord, giving a problem to honest tenants that were trying to do the best that they could. Then you got people who they were paying their rent, they were fine. Then the pandemic hit. They stopped paying because they had to choose between food, their bills, and they're paying their bills and the food. And it helps them, but it doesn't help. It's not helping when you have bad people that are abusing things. How do you weed that out? You have to look at those situations individually, case by case. Some people need help. Others need to be put in a situation where, hey, we'll help you with this part, the pandemic issue, but all this back rent from before March, what happened with that? If that was something separate, that's not something that you should be you should intervene in a different way. And I'm not going to say how to do that, but I think it's unfair to the ones who have tried to pay, who've tried to do the right thing. That's what I'm saying. And who really need help. Those maybe who are working paycheck to paychecks, they can't really, provide for their family. That's what I'm saying. But these other ones that are just monkeying around, playing games, and it's just, for them, it's an opportunity to just mess off money. They get a little check and then they go and, and parlay with it. It's unfair. And so this COVID-19 thing has created all of these issues. It has. It has brought a lot out. And you see how people are reacting to some of these things that are happening in the country. And it's alarming. And these students, the kids, our future for tomorrow are the children. They're telling you their inside experience of what it's like going into these classrooms and how they're afraid. That student that was taking pictures, it's not because they're being bad. They're showing you what is happening. They should have took pictures. Don't blame them. It's not their fault. They're kids and they're young. They're becoming young adults and they're the future. And you're blaming them for bad decisions that you all have made. It's wrong. And then you're mad at protesters because they're speaking out because they see an injustice done during a pandemic. Yeah. Thanks for listening.